Okay, guys, we're back. 250, Introduction to Literary Studies. We are continuing to talk about Adorno, Horkheimer, and Adorno, and the ways in which. Ooh, there's a big bird. Look at this bird. Look at that guy. Getting free lecture from me. He flew away. Um, so we're back talking about Horkheimer. I would say Horkheimer and Adorno, and this idea that again, this is the art and authors. Oh, sorry, art. Sorry, I'm starting over. Really. This is the art and audiences unit. And so we started off by looking at the connection between art and reality, right? Is it a copy? Is it an escape from reality? Is it a copy of reality? Um, is it a dangerous escape? Is it a positive escape? Can we even tell the difference? Does it have anything to do with reality? And then we looked at art and authors, which was very much about when we think about the author of a work, what kinds of what choices are we making about how to think about authors? How do authors relate to artworks? And now we're looking at how artworks relate to audiences. This is the third unit. So in this section, so Adorno, he's talking about the way he says works of art. And he's really thinking of like he's not thinking about like you making a painting in your house for your friends. He's thinking about things like movies, the big stuff and honestly, the stuff that most of us know, the big stuff, the movies, the television shows, the expensive things, the mass culture. Um, and he really feels that essentially art has replaced religion. Religion used to brainwash everybody to think the same thoughts and believe the same things, and we don't have that anymore. And so essentially, movies and TV shows and music are designed to do that. Um, so one of the things to consider here with this, actually, I think before doing this, I have a YouTube example I want to talk about, but let's go a little bit into the text some more. I always like having the see. Remember Brooks? See, I like Brooks. Pay attention to the words on the page. That's why I always try to like connect it back. I try to get quotes. My students always write these papers and then do a whole paper on, Harold Bloom or something, and they never quote him once. And I think it's because they don't understand Harold Bloom. But you gotta try. The words on the page are crucial because I believe in books. So he's talking here about the ways in which they're sort of brainwashing people, and this is particularly important and kind of depressed. I talked about the retroactive need. Um, okay, no mention is made of the fact that the basis on which technology acquires power over society is the power of those whose economic hold over society is greatest. We often don't discuss this. We're like, oh, I'm going to watch something on Netflix. I'm going to watch something on Amazon. I'm going to watch something on my iPhone. I'm going to watch something. I'm going to go to the movies. But movies are only made by a handful of people. There's only a handful of companies that make movies. And guess what? They're all owned by uber mega rich people. There's only a handful of places that make television shows. And guess what? They're all owned by uber mega rich people. Now, of course, you can see your friends on Instagram and you can see your friends on Facebook. But Instagram and Facebook are owned by the same person. And guess what? He's a uber mega rich guy named Mark Zuckerberg. So the issue is that the Adorno really feels like we don't talk enough about how mass culture, we're like, oh, it's popular, everybody loves it, but where's it coming from? Well, it's coming from very rich people. Well, if art is coming from very rich people, then surprise, surprise, they're going to put the things that they care about into the art. Um, uh, think about how difficult it would be to make a movie in which all the rich people got their heads chopped off. Um, it's not that it never happens, but it's rare. Movies often support the rich, which is a sort of. Anyway, I'll go into this more. I'm going to get a couple more words down because I really like looking at the words. Okay. This is a particularly depressing sentence, but I really like it. Now, the next section here. A technological rationale is the rationale of dominion itself. It is the coercive nature of society alienated from itself. Here's the part that's interesting. Automobiles, bombs, and movies keep the whole thing together until their leveling element shows its strength in the very wrong which it furthered. I don't want to spend a ton of time on that sentence, except I want you to notice what Adorno is doing that is unusual there. Usually when we talk about art, we tend to talk about our plays are sort of like movies, or sort of like sculptures, or sort of like paintings, or sort of like TV shows. But he tosses in cars and bombs, which is not the kind of thing we usually don't talk about. We usually don't compare Shakespeare plays to bombs. We compare them to movies. But for him, it's all the same shit. Like, the sort of rich, powerful people who are developing nuclear bombs to take over other countries are the same people who are making movies to brainwash the public, because they're both about power. Movies and bombs are ways of getting power over massive amounts of people. And if you make movies or you make bombs, then you can sort of get people to do what you want them to do. And so it's a very different perspective in art, and it's one that we usually don't talk about in class. We usually treat art like it's this special, you take an art class and it's like not connected to the real world. It's a place of play. Shakespeare's so interesting. Let's just talk about his metaphors and his ironies. And Adorno is like, hey guys, this is basically like a bomb. It's a thing people use to sort of brainwash the public. Okay, yeah, cool. So let's go a little farther into this, and then I'm going to get to some examples. It has made the technology of the culture industry no more than the achievement of standardization and mass production. These two things mean they're both the same. That sort of popular art, like movies and TV, have essentially taken art and made sure it always comes out the same. It looks basically the same, sacrificing whatever involved a distinction between the logic of the work and that of the social system. Right? The social system and the work of art are now essentially the same thing. This is the result not of a law of movement and technology as such, but of its function in today's economy. He talks about it in terms of money and power. This is something we don't usually do. The need which might resist central control has already been suppressed by the control of individual consciousness. The step here, this is an interesting thing, the step from telephone to radio has clearly distinguished the roles. The former still allowed the participants and listeners an authoritative subject to broadcast programs, which are all exactly the same. No machinery of rejoinder has been devised, and private broadcasters are denied any freedom. The idea that he makes a point here that, like, he's talking about radio, and the difference in the radio and the telephone. On the telephone, you can talk to somebody back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. It's a conversation between two people. Now, radio is sort of like radio is sort of like it's sort of like a telephone, right? You're listening to something. The problem is you hear it, but it doesn't hear you. It's a one-way transmission. It's sending stuff at you, and you don't really get to respond. Now, of course, you can respond by making your own work of art, but here's the thing. If you just it's not possible to respond to Marvel. Remember Harold Bloom talks about how, like, each work of art is a revision or a response to a previous work of art. But you, personally, it's very difficult for you to respond to Marvel because Marvel movies cost $1 billion. So unless you have an extra $1 billion, you're going to be making something small that in comparison is going to look small and crummy and unprofessional and amateur. And so this is Adorno's point, is the playing field is not even, right? We're like, oh, anybody can make a work of art. Well, anybody can write a poem. But when we shift into people used to care about poetry a lot. People used to read poetry. It used to be a thing. People did. They don't do that anymore. Now the dominant art form for a long time was poetry and novels. But now the dominant art form is movies and TV shows. Now, it's worth pointing out that, like, it seems like, well, look, back then they had novels and poems, and today we have movies and TV shows. But it's not the same thing, because back then, when they had novels and when they had poems, it was much easier for an individual person to write a novel or a poem. Although, again, Virginia Woolf would point out, you're going to need a room of your own and some time and some money to do it. But it is impossible to create a movie like Marvel makes, because they're so insanely expensive. And so the culture of movies and TV is very different. I have to emphasize the similarities. I'm like, guys, isn't today's movies and TV, I ask you in your papers, I ask you to do this, aren't movies and TVs very similar to poems and plays back in the old days? But Adorno's point is they're not similar, because movies require huge amounts of money to get made. And normal people can't make them. Only a handful of companies have the power to do it, and they tend to put their own stuff in here. Next video, I'll give you some fun examples.